Well, Gary Bryant Jr., former USC wide receiver, is now an Oregon Duck, and he brings two things of note to Oregon's roster. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you haven't already, like, comment, subscribe, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch this show. We're about to hit 2,500 on YouTube. Can we get there by the time this video comes to a close? Over half the people who watch my shows, which I'm very, very grateful for, are not subscribed. Just a thought. Let's see what happens come Tuesday morning. Come Monday morning, though, when this show is dropping, we've got a new wide receiver to talk about. His name, as many of you know, is Gary Bryant Jr. He has 3 years of eligibility remaining. Actually redshirted this past season at USC after he got bumped down the depth chart. 5'11", 180-pound wideout who was a top 50 recruit in the 2020 cycle. I believe was one of the top athletes in that class, was a very, very highly rated 4-star prospect coming out of high school. And this will be his 4th year of college football, and yet he'll have 3 years of eligibility if he wants to use them all with the Ducks. This, of course, is his one-time transfer rule without having to sit out a year. So barring a waiver or, graduating, being a grad transfer, he wouldn't have any other options. But he's going to play at least one season in Eugene. So now he gets added to Oregon's wide receiver room. And he brings two things of note. Number one, depth. And the depth in Oregon's receiver position, I thought was fine. I didn't think they needed to add Gary Bryant Jr. Would I rather have him than not have him? Yeah, of course. You never know when freak injuries are going to happen. I mean, back in the day, Justin Roper was like the 5th quarterback to play that season. You never know. Wide receivers, you never know. I mean, if Troy Franklin, God forbid, were to go down with an injury, suddenly you wouldn't feel quite so good about the wide receiver room. But I contend Oregon didn't need to add him, but I'm certainly glad to have him for a couple of reasons. He brings depth, but he also brings, I guess there's 3 things: speed. And we've talked about team speed, and Dan Lanning's talked about team speed needing to increase from a year ago. I think you're seeing that with Gary Bryant. I think you're seeing that with the Tez Johnson additions to the wide receiving core this offseason. Bo Nix's brother coming over from Troy. We saw him in the spring game. He's very, very fast. But he also brings versatility. And I think that's one of the reasons that Lanning and wide receiver coach Junior Adams and Will Stein, the OC, saw this as a fit. Bryant is a guy who you can line up inside or you can line up outside. And when you look at where Oregon's wide receiver room currently stands, I think you have 2 pretty clear options on the outside. Troy Franklin, of course, being the top option. Trayshawn Holden probably being the other one. Tez Johnson and Chris Hudson battling it out for, playing time in the slot. Those are all experienced, proven players at the Power 5 level. And Bryant has proven that he can be a productive member of a wide receiving core at the Power 5 level, as I'll touch on in a moment. But he's someone who can play in the slot or he can play outside. So if Holden were to go down or if Franklin were to go down, Bryant could be a guy who could step in, or if one of the slot guys were to go down, if they end up splitting time, which is kind of what I suspect, he can go into any one of those spots. So I think that's kind of where he fits in. But he's had 3 very different seasons since getting to USC. In the COVID year, everything was weird, but USC was throwing the ball a lot. He played in 5 games. USC played in 6, I think. I don't know if they played in the bowl game that year. I know they played in at least 5. They were 5-0 when they lost to the Ducks in the Pac-12 championship game. He played in 5 games. He had 7 catches, 51 yards, no touchdowns. And then in 2021, he kind of looked like he had broken out and was becoming a star for USC in their wide receiving core. In 10 games, he caught 44 passes, 579 yards, 7 touchdowns. And then there's a regime change at USC. Lincoln Riley comes in. He brings with him Jordan Addison and Mario Williams and Brendan Rice, amongst others, but most notably those 3 who are all ahead of him on the depth chart. He plays in just 3 games a season ago. He catches 2 passes for 15 yards, no touchdowns. He redshirts, and now he's in the portal and, of course, coming to the Ducks. So we've seen the potential, right? If he is a number 2 or 3 option, he could be a guy who ends up in I think the 4 to 500 yard range, right? I mean, 579. That was in a very pass happy offense, so I don't think, barring an injury to Troy Franklin, he could replicate that sort of production, but he could get in that sort of range with regards to his yardage output, depending on where he falls on the depth chart. And the curious part about this is I look at Oregon's receiving core, and I don't know where exactly he slots in. I talked about the versatility, right? And I'm curious what you all think. So drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments or shoot me a note on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks, because I don't see the immediate spot, right? Like Trayshawn Holden looks really good, and Troy Franklin looks good, and Kyler Casper looks ready to go and to grow into an increased role, and Jurion Dickey's coming in the fall. Now maybe they add Bryant because I know Dickey's had some injury struggles while he's been in high school, so maybe they don't feel like he'll be fully ready come fall. That could be playing a factor as to why they make this addition. But like, I don't see him automatically sliding in and being a starter, right? I mean, obviously he'd be more likely to replace Trayshawn Holden than Troy Franklin, but I don't feel like a guy of Holden's caliber would have come to Oregon if he ever had the sense, or if he ever got an inclination from the coaching staff, or if the coaching staff felt that he was not capable of firmly locking down the number 2 receiver slot. But I think this will also be kind of a case study in how much Will Stein changes the personnel groupings compared to a year ago, where even when Oregon went 5 wide, they never went 5 wide receivers. They went 1 tight end, 1 running back, 3 wide receivers, right? And then they could shift into tighter, more run heavy formations there. But they went 5 wide a lot last year and utilized receivers in those spots. I mean, Chris Hudson had some great moments there. Franklin had some really good moments. The touchdown against Washington State, the game winner, that came out of 5 wide with Troy Franklin. But maybe Will Stein is looking at the idea of going 5 wide this year with Bo Nix and saying, I want to have 1 tight end on the field, that being T. Ferg, of course, and I want to be able to put 4 receivers around him rather than having a couple guys being a running back. Yeah, that could be. Could absolutely be. That's more like what he ran at UTSA, a lot more 11 personnel, 1 tight end sense and whatnot. So that could be a possibility for sure as to why they feel like this is an addition. But I'm really curious as to where he's going to fit in the depth chart, how quickly he can develop chemistry with Bo Nix, who's already got chemistry with 3 receivers that we know of, right? And based on the spring game, it looked like Trayshawn Holden was a guy that Bo Nix already started to trust and really wanted to get the ball to. But we know he's got chemistry with Troy Franklin. We know he's got it with Hudson because Hudson was Oregon's 2nd leading receiver a season ago. And we even know he's got it with Tez Johnson, who's his brother, right? So that's all built in. So I wonder where Bryant falls into that kind of hierarchy of target prioritization for Bo Nix. But I think what it allows him to do is maybe not have to rely on 1 or 2 guys, right? Is have that depth of weapons to where he can just make the right read, dissect the defense, and put the ball where it needs to be, and trust that he's going to have an explosive playmaker on the other side. And Bryant can absolutely do that. This was from Mark Culkin, who's our USC host here at the Locked On Network. I said, can you just give me a brief rundown of Gary Bryant Jr.? He said, quote, Gary has the speed to burn and can get you the tough catch in traffic. Plus, he can return punts and kickoffs too. His freshman season, he returned to kickoff to set up a game-winning touchdown against UCLA. Excuse me. And I would definitely watch out for him in the return game, because that's been like, I think that's pretty open for the Ducks at this point in time. Like, Troy Franklin's been back there returning kicks or returning punts. I don't know if I love that. I don't know if I need Troy Franklin to risk an injury in that sort of spot. We've seen a variety of kick returners come through. Like, I could definitely see him being a factor in that game. In 24 total returns over his first 2 years, he averaged 26 yards a return. So, not bad for sure. But I want to know your thoughts on Gary Bryant. Send me all your questions, and we'll get them answered this week for sure on the show. And we've got another transfer to talk about at a position that everybody's been watching, myself included, over the last several weeks. But I think Oregon's finally done there. We'll talk about that after we talk about Built Bars, which are indeed a delicious snack without all the sugar and calories. They're the best tasting protein bars ever. They really are. I was never a protein guy. Bill got me into them. They're in my pantry. They're in my golf bag everywhere. I even have one in my golf bag here in Central Oregon, where I am bringing you this very show in the Bend area this week. It is beautiful and wonderful, and it is great to be back in the state of Oregon. But it's always great to be back and eating Built Bars, which are covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real dark chocolate, churro, mint brownie, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream. They've got everything. 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, whopping 17 grams of protein for all the great flavors. Built.com, Walmart, Sam's Club. You can get your next order of Built Bars at all of those locations. Pharmacy section at Walmart, variety box at Sam's Club, all your specialty flavors at Built.com. If you're close to a Sam's Club, get a 13-bar box with hit flavors, brownie batter, puff, and churro puff. Do so. You can thank me later. Always a nice moment to get a nice little break in there, right? Rest the voice and get a nice little hotel cup of water. All right. So Kaden Ludwick is the other transfer that Oregon brought in. Definitely, I think even more so than Casey Kelly, a bit of a depth piece at tight end. Now, he comes over from Colorado, where he did not play a season ago and was actually recruited as a linebacker or edge player, kind of outside linebacker sort of prospect. He was a 3-star coming out, not super highly sought after, was not even in the top 1,000 recruits nationally. Doesn't mean he can't become a good player, but, this isn't a guy that Oregon was like after in the 2022 cycle and then wasn't able to get, but they came back later and kept the relationships. But he made the switch to tight end, didn't play for Colorado. He's 6'5", he's 240 pounds, so he's physically ready to step in and play that position. That's a big dude, like a big dude. But there have been, I don't think it's been totally confirmed yet, but there have been rumblings that he could be a preferred walk-on rather than a scholarship player. Regardless, he is, I think, fully solidifying the tight end depth for 2023. Because now you have T-Ferg, you have Patrick Herbert, you have Kenyon Sadiq, the true freshman, you have Casey Kelly, and now you have Kaden Ludwick. That's 5 tight ends that, even if he's coming in as a preferred walk-on, they have a scholarship or two available by last count, so they could maybe give him one or give him the chance to earn one over the course of the season and whatnot. Not sure how that all plays out. But anytime you bring in a transfer, it's hard to see you bringing in more at that position, especially when you've added 2. So I think Oregon is done adding portal tight ends. Not necessarily are they done entirely in the transfer portal, but it kind of feels like things have really, really settled down on that front, and that they've got sufficient depth at every position except for perhaps one other position, that being linebacker. We'll talk about that via mailbag question later in the show. Interesting note about Ludwick, though. His class of 2022, he redshirted a year ago. So in the old-fashioned sense, he's got 4 years of eligibility left for the Ducks. So maybe it's a situation where he comes in as a preferred walk-on now, and then he's a scholarship player next year, but they want to hold the scholarship for now. Like, I don't know. Like, that doesn't seem like the most unrealistic situation in the world to me. So Oregon's got 5 tight ends that clearly they feel solid about, and he is one of them. I don't expect him to be a big-time player, but you never know when he's going to, have to step in. And the injury to Ferguson in spring football once again highlighted like the need to add players at that spot. And Oregon went out, added Casey Kelly from Ole Miss. They were not able to get Varquez Gums. They didn't get Seydou Traore, who were coming from North Texas and Colorado, respectively, but they get a different Colorado tight end. I think it makes a lot of sense, but I think they're done adding portal tight ends, and I feel perfectly fine about the depth of that position group going into this year, and the talent as well. Like, T. Ferg is a beast. I think this will be his last year because I think he's a Sunday kind of guy, and Patrick Herbert is solid, not elite, but poised to take a step forward. Should be given the opportunity to do that as what should be Oregon's number 2 tight end. And I think for the number 3 tight end spot, I think it's a battle between all these guys, right? You'd have to maybe lean towards Casey Kelly as having the advantage, but I saw Kenyon Sadiq in that spring game, and he was pretty darn explosive. A little bit smaller, for sure, but he looked pretty explosive as well. So I'm excited about what he brings from an upside standpoint. So Ludwick and Bryant, those are the two transfers. Again, drop your thoughts below if you're watching on YouTube, or hit me up on Twitter at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. By the way, quick note on the mailbag before I get to two questions from some of you out there. I had I've been getting a lot of questions, which I love, by the way. I'm going to get to all of them. I will never let a question go unanswered. But Wayne, if you're out there watching or listening, I believe you sent me a question. I'm not even kidding about this, by the way. I had a reminder on my phone to add your question in the mailbag, but I forgot where you sent it to me, and I couldn't find it in the Twitter DMs, and I might have missed it in the YouTube comments. But Wayne, if you're out there and you had a question recently, let me know and hit me up with it so I can get to it on an upcoming episode of the show. This one comes in from Nate. Hey, Spencer, do you have any news or comments on the recent rumors about Washington and Oregon being, quote, vetted and, quote, cleared for the Big Ten? This again. Do you think this is likely to happen? No. Or just another realignment rumor? Could this have something to do with the PAC media deal being prolonged? Thanks. Love the show. Appreciate you, Nate. So, no, I don't give a whole lot of validity to these rumors that are flying around from Twitter and are just kind of out there. Like there's some, pretty legit reporters who are saying like, oh, the Big Ten has vetted them and whatnot. So here's what I would ask the people who read this and say, oh, well, that means Oregon and Washington, it's going to happen. They're going to get the invite and whatnot. And I'm happy to come on here and tell you I was wrong if I end up being wrong on this. But Oregon and Washington at any point in time would jump to the Big Ten tomorrow if given the opportunity. USC and UCLA announced that they were leaving in July. Now, from July until now, the only thing that has changed is that the Big Ten lost their commissioner. They have since hired a new one, Tony Petitti, after Kevin Warren was basically forced out by the Big Ten presidents. Now, the reason the prevailing winds would say that the reason Kevin Warren was forced out as Big Ten commissioner is that the Big Ten president said, we're good. We're fine for now. 16 teams, we're chilling. We'll start it next year, and we don't need to go further west at this point in time. If at any point in time, right, and what is going to be written on my gravestone, everybody, as I say on Locked On Pac-12 all the time, presidents vote on realignment. The presidents drive the bus here. Other people are involved, absolutely. But at the end of the day, nothing happens if an overwhelming majority of presidents in a conference don't want it to. Individual schools can act like USC and UCLA, but in terms of things happening on a conference-wide level, most of the presidents have to sign off on it. Not 50% plus one. It's at least in the Pac-12, it's been 8 out of 12 or 8 out of 10, somewhere in that range. I don't know that there's ever been a specific number, but I know that it's well over 50% have to approve. So for the Big Ten presidents who had a commissioner who was aggressive, forward-thinking, and wanted the Big Ten to, be the most national conference in the country and whatnot, and they said, we're okay. We're good for now. Why don't you go somewhere else and we're going to bring in a different commissioner? What changed between July and now? The answer is nothing, right? Other than the Pac-12 didn't get a deal. Oh, wait, the Pac-12 hasn't had a deal this entire time. So Washington and Oregon, theoretically, starting in 2024, have been, quote unquote, on the market this entire time. Any time since from July until now, the Big Ten could have extended an offer, and Oregon, Washington, I believe 100% would have jumped ship. I've long said the Big 12 doesn't have the power to tank the Pac-12, but the Big Ten absolutely does. So when I see these reports about, oh, they've been vetted and whatnot, here's what that sounds like to me. When you're an athletic director, and I've seen this up front in Division I universities, when you are an athletic director and you know or have an inclination that your current head coach for a given sport might be departing, you go into that interview process if and when that coach departs with names already in mind. So here's what the Big Ten is essentially doing. They're preparing for the possibility of changing their minds with regards to further westward expansion. And if it's true, it's hard to know what's true with all this realignment stuff and such. if it's true that the Big Ten vetted and cleared Oregon and Washington, well, then why don't they have an offer? The answer is that I think the Big Ten is preparing itself for a potentially further evolving and changing landscape to be ready for any and every situation. So they're looking at Oregon, Washington, and let's say they actually did do this and said, okay, yeah, those are teams we could add. But you don't have an opening right now, right? If a company is going to hire for a position, let's say they're going to create a new role, which is essentially what the Big Ten would be doing. If you're going to create a new role at your company, you're going to go into it before you announce the opening with some candidates in mind who you'll want to bring in to interview. They might be friends of the CFO or the CEO or your vice president of marketing if it's a new role in that department, whatever the case may be. You're going to have an idea of who you might want. So the Big Ten might have an idea of, hey, one day we might want Oregon and Washington. But do I suspect that that day is now? No. Because if that day were now, I don't know why they would be waiting until this particular moment, right? Only potential theory, and again, I don't think this just popped in my head as I was positing all of this, is that the Pac-12 teams would have less leverage with the negotiations for the new media rights deal taking this long, is they could potentially offer a smaller dollar figure to Oregon and Washington. But if they wanted to offer that, right, at a reduced rate compared to the other Big Ten teams, at least at first, Oregon and Washington would still take it because it'd still be probably more than what they would get in the Pac-12. Like if you said, "Hey, we'll give you 40 million a year." The Big Ten deal pays like I think it's 75 million. If they said, "Here's 40, 45 million per year." Yeah, they're going to take it because the Pac-12 is clearly not going to reach that number in terms of a media rights yearly payout per school. So I don't get the feeling that this is Oregon and Washington on the cusp of going to the Big Ten. If these rumors are true, which I have no reason to know if they are, I have no way of knowing if they are. I have no way of knowing if they're not. I've got pretty worn out on trying to figure out what's true and what's not over the last several months in the realignment landscape. But if it is, I think that's the Big Ten preparing for the future, not getting ready to make a move that is imminent. We'll see, but I have serious doubts on that front. Okay, last one, wrapping up from Eric, who's an everydayer out there. Guy is absolutely tapped into Locked On Ducks, and I love it. It's confusing to me, Eric says, that the Ducks don't seem to be looking to add another linebacker from the transfer portal. We only have 6 scholarship athletes to cover 2 positions, and injuries are part of the game. Do you think the coaches might be planning to move yet another safety to linebacker in the fall? If so, who do you think that might be? He's, of course, referring to Jamal Hill, who's going to play linebacker after having been a safety the last several years. So, 2 thoughts. I don't think there is a body at safety that could move down to the linebacker position, right? Jamal Hill was that guy, and he's already made the jump. So I don't think we can do that, right? Brian Addison is 6'5", but he's thin. He's built much more like a safety. Or, Evan Williams. Don't think he's got a linebacker sort of build. Steve Stevens, no. Tyshim Johnson maybe would be the closest, but again, I think he's got the sort of speed that you want on the back end of your defense if you're Dan Lanning, Tosh Lupoy, and the rest of the defensive staff. So I don't think they're going to move anybody else. And frankly, they could add a transfer, but I don't know that they need to. Because when you only have 2 linebackers on the field at any given time, unless it's a goal line package, if you got 6 guys there who are scholarship players, I think that's enough, right? You could. It's kind of like the wide receiver room. Like you could, and you could see how the coaches would get to that spot. But do they need to? Is it a pressing matter? I don't think so. No, especially when you have a redshirt freshman named Devin Jackson who hasn't played very much, that I've been high on for the last couple of years since he came out and came to the Ducks a season ago, who's got elite high-end speed, who looked really good and explosive with that speed in the spring game. I think if you're looking at a linebacker core, yeah, they don't have Keith Brown anymore, but they seem to like Connor Swelley from Arizona State, or else they wouldn't have added him. But if you've got Justin Jacobs, Jeff Bossa, Jamal Hill, Connor Swelley, Devin Jackson, like I could see it, but they might look at what they have in that room and say, we think Bossa is going to take a step forward. We think Jamal Hill is going to fit in. We think that Devin Jackson is somebody else who can take a step forward, start to grow into his own as an Oregon football player. And Justin Jacobs, if he stays healthy, you know what you have. So they could add another one for depth purposes, but I don't see them as necessarily needing to do that. But as always, curious what you all think. Thank you so much for the question. Keep them coming in. YouTube comments, Twitter at smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks. Appreciate everyone listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.